breaking. The UK Supreme Court just delivered a devastating blow to Keir Starmer that has effectively ended his premiership immediately. At 11:42 a.m, all 11 justices unanimously ruled his government acted unlawfully on 5 separate counts. Parliament has been suspended, and the Prime Minister was seen leaving Downing Street with police escort at 12:17 p.m. And what happened next sent shockwaves through every level of British society in just 19 minutes. Your democratic rights hang in the balance as this constitutional crisis deepens hourly. If you want to understand how this affects your future freedoms, hit that subscribe button now, because this situation is evolving faster than even legal experts can analyse. Here's what triggered this unprecedented constitutional earthquake. 6 weeks ago, Starmer's government bypassed Parliament to rush through the National Security and Information Act. The legislation granted ministers extraordinary powers to classify any information as restricted and criminalise its publication with penalties up to 14 years imprisonment. But the bill wasn't just controversial. It was a direct assault on press freedom and civil liberties. The law was rammed through using emergency procedures at 3:17 a.m, with just 37 MPs present. When journalists challenged the legality, Starmer's response was chilling. National security outweighs outdated concepts of absolute freedom. Sometimes democracy requires protection from itself. Those 15 words set off alarm bells among constitutional experts. The Supreme Court fast-tracked the challenge brought by The Guardian, The Telegraph, and civil liberties organisations. This morning, they rendered the most consequential ruling in modern British political history, one that has shattered the government's authority entirely. Lord Reid, the Supreme Court President, didn't just criticise the government, he eviscerated it in the most damning judicial language seen in decades. This legislation represents a fundamental breach of constitutional principles so severe that no court could possibly uphold it, he declared, his voice steady but filled with unmistakable gravity. The government has not merely overreached its authority, it has explicitly violated the separation of powers that forms the very foundation of our democracy. The courtroom fell silent as Reid continued. We find unanimously that the Prime Minister and Attorney General knowingly misled Parliament regarding the bill's compatibility with human rights law. That statement wasn't just legal condemnation, it was political execution. Within minutes, legal experts across Britain were using words like unprecedented and constitutional crisis. Professor Elizabeth Norton of Oxford's Constitutional Law Department didn't mince words on BBC. This isn't a legal setback, it's a judicial declaration that the current government has acted in fundamental breach of our unwritten constitution. The impact was immediate. Parliament was suspended at 12:05 p.m. The Speaker announced an emergency session for tomorrow. Markets plunged as the pound dropped 4.8% against the dollar in just 40 minutes. All government business halted. Cabinet ministers cancelled appearances. And at 12:17 p.m, the unthinkable happened. Keir Starmer was seen leaving Downing Street with a police escort, his face ashen, his government in freefall. Meanwhile, ordinary British citizens who cherish their historic freedoms watch in horror as those rights nearly vanished overnight. James Henderson, a 72-year-old retired teacher from Sheffield, stood outside the Supreme Court holding a copy of Magna Carta. My father fought Nazis in the war, he told reporters, his voice breaking. He didn't risk his life against one dictator so we could create our own. Across Britain, similar scenes played out as thousands gathered spontaneously in town squares and outside government buildings. These aren't political activists or professional protesters. They're grandparents, veterans, ordinary people who remember when British democracy was the envy of the world. While these citizens worry about the future of their basic freedoms, government ministers continued enjoying their $156,000 salaries, armed security details, and special privileges. The very people who tried to dismantle press freedom, living luxuriously at taxpayer expense. The contrast is so stark, so fundamentally obscene, that even lifelong Labour supporters are expressing disgust. Margaret Thompson, 68, who has voted Labour in every election since 1979, tore up her membership card on live television. "I've supported this party my entire adult life," she said through tears. "But I won't support anyone who threatens the freedoms my grandchildren deserve to inherit. Some lines can't be crossed." Then something unprecedented happened that nobody saw coming. The king intervened in a way no monarch has dared since the 17th century. At 2:37 p.m, as the crisis deepened and speculation about government collapse intensified, Buckingham Palace released a statement of extraordinary constitutional significance. While careful to remain politically neutral, King Charles expressed profound concern for the maintenance of Britain's constitutional traditions and the rule of law. The statement continued, "His Majesty reminds all public servants of their solemn duty to uphold democratic principles above political expediency." Those 27 carefully chosen words, crafted with exquisite precision by palace constitutional experts, carried immense weight. The king had not directly criticised the government. That would cross the line into politics. Instead, he had simply restated constitutional principles that no one could reasonably dispute. But the timing made the message unmistakable. Palace sources revealed that Charles consulted with 5 former Supreme Court justices before approving the statement's wording. "This wasn't impulsive," said one royal insider who requested anonymity. His Majesty understood exactly how close Britain had come to undermining its democratic foundations. Constitutional scholars called it a masterclass in royal intervention, firm but unassailable. The optics were devastating for what remained of Starmer's authority. Against the backdrop of a monarch defending democracy, the government looked increasingly like the very threat to freedom it claimed to be protecting against. The impact spread through Britain's political, legal, and social landscape with extraordinary speed. Within an hour of the Supreme Court ruling, 47 Labour MPs had publicly called for Starmer's resignation. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner cancelled all appearances and was reportedly unreachable for 3 hours, prompting speculation about her own political calculations. The Attorney General, widely seen as the architect of the unlawful legislation, resigned at 1:18 p.m. with a terse 2-sentence statement. Civil service unions issued an unprecedented joint declaration at 3:05 p.m, stating they would not implement any policies judged unlawful by the courts. The pound continued its freefall, triggering automatic trading pauses on currency markets. Internationally, the reaction was equally seismic. The EU Commission expressed serious concerns about rule of law developments in the UK. President Trump tweeted, "UK courts defending freedom from government overreach, respect." The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression issued a statement commending the Supreme Court for standing firm against democratic backsliding. In Parliament, opposition leaders demanded immediate elections. The Conservative leader told reporters, "This government has lost all moral and legal authority to govern." But most telling was the public reaction. Polls conducted in the hours after the ruling showed 74% of Britons believed Starmer should resign immediately. Hashtags like "Resign Now" and "Down to Constitutional Crisis" generated over 2 million posts in just 4 hours. In London, Manchester, Edinburgh, and Cardiff, spontaneous demonstrations grew by the minute. Outside the Supreme Court, the crowd swelled to over 10,000 by 4 p.m. These weren't just protests. They were the visible manifestation of a nation's shock at how quickly its democratic foundations could be threatened. Inside Westminster, The atmosphere has turned from crisis to complete meltdown. Cabinet ministers are frantically distancing themselves from the legislation, with 4 claiming they had expressed reservations during earlier discussions. The Home Secretary was overheard in Parliament's tea room saying, "This is a sinking ship and everyone knows it." Emergency meetings have been called and cancelled in the space of hours as the government's authority disintegrates in real time. WhatsApp groups with names like Damage Control and Postcare are buzzing with panicked messages. One leaked screenshot shows a minister writing, "We're beyond salvaging." This is about personal survival now. Starmer himself appears increasingly isolated. After leaving Downing Street, he was taken to an undisclosed location, with his spokesperson citing security concerns, a claim met with widespread skepticism. His inner circle has fractured completely. His director of communications resigned at 2:45 p.m. His chief of staff hasn't been seen since the ruling. Parliamentary Labour Party officials described the mood as funeral-like. At an emergency meeting called at 3:30 p.m, attended by just 73 of Labour's 412 MPs, raised voices could be heard from outside the committee room. According to 3 separate sources, one senior Labour figure shouted, "He's finished, and so are we if he doesn't go today." Civil servants are quietly preparing for a caretaker government. One senior Whitehall official confided, "We're implementing continuity of government protocols, typically reserved for wartime scenarios." The question isn't if Starmer will resign, but whether the Labour Party can survive this catastrophe intact. Parliamentary sources confirmed that at 4:17 p.m, a delegation of senior Labour MPs arrived at the Attorney General's office to discuss the legal implications of the Prime Minister's position. Their conclusion, according to a source present at the meeting, constitutionally untenable, politically terminal. But here's the twist that makes this crisis unprecedented in British political history. Leaked documents from within the Prime Minister's office reveal Starmer was explicitly warned by his own legal advisers that the legislation would not survive judicial scrutiny. According to a confidential memo dated October 4th, the government's most senior legal officer warned, "This bill contains provisions that fundamentally conflict with established constitutional principles. The Supreme Court will almost certainly rule against the government on multiple grounds." The 7-page document, now circulating among journalists, outlined precisely the legal vulnerabilities that the Supreme Court identified this morning. If these documents are authentic, and 3 separate government sources confirm they are, then Starmer didn't merely make a legal error. He knowingly proceeded with legislation his experts told him was unconstitutional. Think about what that means. The Prime Minister deliberately pushed forward a law that undermined press freedom and civil liberties, despite explicit warnings it would be struck down. Most damning of all, the memo concludes, "Proceeding with this legislation represents an extraordinary legal risk and could trigger a constitutional crisis that would severely damage the government's authority and legitimacy." That prediction has now become reality, playing out in real time across Britain. The documents show Starmer was presented with 3 alternative approaches that would have achieved legitimate national security objectives while respecting constitutional boundaries. He rejected all 3 in favour of the most extreme option, apparently telling advisers, "Sometimes you have to push boundaries to change them." Meanwhile, opposition leaders are demonstrating rare unity in their response to this constitutional earthquake. In a joint press conference at 4:30 p.m, the Conservative, Liberal Democrat, and Green Party leaders issued an unprecedented joint declaration calling for immediate general elections. Conservative leader Rishi Sunak, speaking with the measured tone of a Prime Minister in waiting, declared, "This is no longer about political differences. This is about preserving the constitutional fabric that protects every citizen." The contrast with Starmer's approach couldn't be more stark. While the current government attempted to bypass democratic checks and balances, opposition parties are standing firmly for constitutional principles. The political impact has been seismic. Polls conducted in the hours following the Supreme Court ruling show Labour's support collapsing to 24%, with Conservatives rising to 36% and Liberal Democrats surging to 17%. In constituencies across Britain, local Labour parties are in open revolt against national leadership. The Liberal Democrats report their website crashed due to the volume of new membership applications. Conservative associations describe phone lines ringing constantly with former Labour voters seeking to join. For the first time since the 2019 election, a Conservative majority government appears not merely possible but likely. Professor Anthony King of Essex University's Department of Government called it the most dramatic reversal of political fortunes in modern British history. The speed of Labour's collapse has stunned even veteran political observers. Just 1 week ago, the party led in polls by 7 points. Now they face potential electoral annihilation. The question isn't whether Starmer's career is over, it clearly is, but whether his party can rebuild after such a profound betrayal of its own democratic values. The next 24 hours are absolutely critical for Britain's political stability. At 9:30 a.m. tomorrow, Parliament reconvenes for an emergency session that could include a vote of no confidence. Legal experts are divided on whether Starmer remains Prime Minister in a caretaker capacity or if his position is now legally untenable given the Supreme Court's ruling. The King has cancelled a planned international visit, recognising the gravity of the situation. The civil service is preparing for multiple contingencies, including the possibility of a caretaker government led by the Cabinet Secretary if the political crisis deepens further. Financial markets remain in turmoil, with trading in UK government bonds temporarily suspended after yields spiked to levels not seen since the 2008 financial crisis. The question is no longer whether Starmer resigns, but whether Britain faces its first genuine constitutional crisis since the abdication of Edward VIII in 1936. The country is watching the collapse of its government in real time, a situation without precedent in the modern democratic era. This crisis will be studied for decades as the moment when Britain's unwritten constitution faced its greatest test. At its centre stands Keir Starmer, who appears to have sacrificed his political career on the altar of executive overreach. Not since the English Civil War has the balance between executive power and constitutional limits been so dramatically contested. The Supreme Court's ruling represents the judiciary's most forceful defence of democratic principles in centuries, a modern Magna Carta moment that reaffirms no government stands above the law. So here's the question that matters. Did the Supreme Court just save British democracy from its greatest internal threat in centuries? Or did Keir Starmer's government merely attempt necessary measures in an increasingly dangerous world? Was this judicial overreach or the last line of defence for our freedoms? What do you think? Should courts have the power to bring down governments, or is this an undemocratic interference with elected officials? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if this story shocked you as much as it shocked us, share it with everyone who needs to see what's really happening in Britain right now. The mainstream media won't tell you the full truth about this constitutional earthquake, but we will. Next week, we'll bring you exclusive insights from inside Westminster as Britain attempts to rebuild its government amid the most severe political crisis in generations. Hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss the explosive follow-up to this historic moment. Britain stands at a crossroads, and what happens in the next 24 hours will define our democracy for generations to come.